I think it pretty much comes down to deciding for yourself, and that comes down to listening to yourself as much as possible and just like hearing what the inner voice has to say. Autonomy is great, like you want to do your own thing, but you also want to be able to bring it home to a way that benefits people. And I think that's the way you provide value in general.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Aiken, and I manage career services at the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University. Welcome to MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. Agency and autonomy are two sides of a very valuable coin. Autonomy is the right to make decisions about our lives without the influence of external impacts. Agency is about our ability or capacity to put these choices into action, to instigate change, and to make a difference. My guest today, Ayotunde Adeyinka, personifies both of these, and I'm excited to talk more with him about how these two concepts came to be so central to his upbringing, life, and work, and how they'll continue to impact him as he graduates with his bachelor's in MS&E and move forward in the world. Ayotunde, thank you so much for being here today. One of the things that I always talk about with students is the importance of studying away from home if you have the opportunity to do that, because it brings just such a different and unique learning and growth before you even think about the academics themselves, just that experience of being somewhere else. And you're a really long way from home. So can you bring us up to speed on your background and what inspired you to study internationally?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I definitely am a long way from home. It's a bit surreal sometimes when I stop to think about it. I grew up my entire life in Lagos, Nigeria, as the only boy and middle kid of three in a very tight-knit and loving family. As a kid, I guess you could say I was super inquisitive, maybe even annoyingly so. I remember always being full with questions and trying to figure out what the heck was going on in this very strange world where nothing seemed to make sense to me, even though everyone around me acted like it did, adults and kids alike. Actually, one of my earliest memories involves me being completely obsessed with this one app I found on the App Store that was literally just a flip book of like 10,000 random facts. I spent way too much time scrolling through that and constantly bugging my parents with endless rounds of, did you know this or did you know that? Thankfully, my parents encouraged that kind of curiosity. And looking back, they definitely created an environment where I felt like I had the freedom to pretty much pursue whatever piqued my interest. And I think this was especially important because school for me, at least initially, was the opposite experience. I attended this very strict, traditional British primary school where everything was rules and structure and precision. Things like lining up in straight lines and walking to and from classes in those perfectly straight lines.
Particular side of the corridor.
Exactly, yes. You had to walk on the right side of the walkways and have your fingernails cut exactly to specify. Like, it was ridiculous. And the consequence for not doing this was like getting sent to the principal's office. I actually vividly remember crying a few times during my first few weeks there because it felt so incredibly different from the environment I had at home. And honestly, that was probably the origin of this early dichotomy, I guess you could say subconsciously, where school for me was about following rules and checking boxes. And the real fulfilling learning happened on my own time, in my own space at home. And then I guess another big part of my upbringing was having an extended family who were spread out across 5 different countries on 4 different continents. So growing up, every couple of years, we'd gather somewhere, usually at some family member's house, and usually during Christmas, and have a festive reunion for a couple of weeks. And there, in the midst of my Australian and American and British and Canadian cousins, I would say I developed a pretty international context to a lot of things, just as a byproduct of getting closer with them and trying to understand them and finding the common threads that sort of bound us all together. Fast forward to my late high school years, when I obviously began thinking about options for college. I'd been passively doing research online during COVID, just scrolling through websites, blogs, watching YouTube videos. These were all like portals to help me better understand like what different colleges were like and what programs really resonated with me, etc. And it's safe to say that it didn't take long at all for it to become clear that the US was where I wanted to be. I was drawn to the optimism, the enthusiasm, the openness, and just the incredible accomplishments coming out of American universities in general. Stanford in particular, and more than anywhere else, I felt embodied like all these values literally to the max.
Positivity. Yeah. That was something I noticed when I moved here from the UK too. Just everybody is very positive and, like you say, enthusiastic and optimistic about
Absolutely.
what the future can be.
Yeah, it was a very new feeling to me. Dream come true that after going through the grueling college application process, I was fortunate enough to receive and accept an offer from my dream school, which is Stanford. Again, that was one of the moments where I felt like I was fully able to follow the path that most resonated with me. And shout out to my parents for being such catalysts for my autonomy. And I guess you could say like my self-realization journey as a whole, because they gave me the opportunity to just figure out what I wanted to do.
And so then you get here to Stanford and you've got just this huge range. It sounds like you would be a dream contestant on Jeopardy with those 10,000 facts that you had before. How much exploring did you do once you got here academically?
My first few quarters here was like being a kid in a candy store. I would say I for sure dove pretty much headfirst into picking and choosing whatever classes I thought looked interesting. In my first year, I took classes ranging from CS classes to history classes, comparative medicine, economics, etc. It was like being in Disneyland, literally. And arguably, one of my favorite classes in my freshman year that I took was this class called Simsys 1, Minds and Machines. It was probably the most intellectually impactful class I took for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it just expanded my intellectual horizon more than any other class. So it touched on philosophy, neuroscience, linguistics, AI. I remember one of the first readings we had was reading Meditations by Rene Descartes and going through the thought experiment he proposed about just doubting everything that exists until you reach the rock bottom and get to the famous saying that I think, therefore I am. And when I read that for the first time, I thought like, surely philosophy is solved, that's the answer to everything. But obviously that wasn't the case. And what the class did was to open me up to the different questions that could be asked about existence in the world. I think going forward just made me attempt first principles thinking to every other question I had. So that was just one example of the way like the variety of classes I took during my freshman year really helped me become a fuller, richer person and just to have more questions than answers about the world. And I think that's obviously one of the appeals of coming here, the liberal arts system, where you're able to just satisfy those cravings.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you definitely took full advantage of that full breadth of what's available here.
Yeah.
Obviously, you ended up in a lot of MS&E too. So why were we the one amongst all of these other majors that you could have chosen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was obviously super interested in the lore of Silicon Valley and startups and building companies right from the start. But I think what actually crystallized my decision to major in MS&E was taking this one class in freshman year, which was probably one of my favorite classes, The Spirit of Entrepreneurship with Ravi Balani. I would describe this class as the gateway drug to everything VC and Silicon Valley. What was most exciting about it for me was the weekly guest speakers we had, which was nothing short of insane, to actually meet the people that I'd read about all the time on TechCrunch articles who all for some reason as well took the class while they were at Stanford and just painted really candid and vulnerable pictures of their journeys in ways that were so relatable, not least because we're literally sitting in the chairs they sat in a few years before. And that just really made everything real. And it really inspired me to look at my own journey and note that there is a path for me to go out and achieve the things that I would want to in the future. So MS&E for me was a vehicle for giving me models to think about how I actually wanted to provide value to people in the future and actually practically applying that in different classes and trying your hands and prototyping. It was very hands-on as well. So it was a no-brainer for me to end up as an MS&E major.
And then you talked to in that class, there was this particular values exercise that you did as well. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, yes. So in that one class, one of the class activities we had was looking at this 10 by 10 grid of 100 personal values that people around the world hold dear and narrowing that down to our top 20, 10, 5, and 1. I just went through that exercise and ended up with my top value being autonomy. I think that was the first time it was ever clearly articulated, that feeling that I had that I just wanted to be the primary driving force behind the decisions in my life and behind the areas of interest I pursued. And I think that brought a lot of clarity to me as a person and the things that bring me fulfillment. Crystallizing that and using that word, which I hadn't actually thought of before, as a way to remind myself of the one value that I have was such an impactful class. And I think just discovering myself in that way made me really optimistic about what the rest of MS&E had to offer.
I think oftentimes when you can boil something down that's so fundamental to us to one particular word or one particular phrase, and what you talked about earlier with this freedom that your parents gave you to explore, and then you making that decision and you freshman year there to just really explore widely to see what sticks. It doesn't feel surprising at all that autonomy would be your main value. So let's talk about that a little bit more and how we see that autonomy and that drive for autonomy, how highly you value it, reflected in your life in general.
Yeah. So for me, it is something that's reinforced socially. So it's very easy to let that go. But I think it pretty much comes down to deciding for yourself. And that comes down to listening to yourself as much as possible and just like hearing what the inner voice has to say. In my life, that kind of manifests with things like me grabbing coffee chats with people I find interesting simply because I want to talk to them, or just listening to the kind of podcast I want to listen to, experimenting, building, tinkering with ideas, and just engaging with the world in a way that comes most naturally to me and aligns with whatever goals I have, really without worrying what everyone else is doing. What I will say is like, I learned very quickly that as admirable a goal as that is, it could get very isolating. And that was one of the things I had to work through during my time here, is finding the balance between autonomy, but also being part of a system and being part of a social class. At Stanford, there's so many amazing people here, and just learning how to straddle the line between doing what I wanted and also getting the best out of everyone who was around me. I guess two things that reinforce sort of the need for others within this autonomous journey that I'm having was firstly, the Lean Launchpad class I took in my sophomore year. I describe it as a 10-week Navy SEAL bootcamp for startups, more or less, where you work on a team and iterate quickly through ideas. And it involves working together, using complementary skills, talking to a lot of customers. With that class, I was working with a couple graduate and PhD engineers working on their project because I found it really interesting. But it was just great to see how much value was produced almost exponentially the more smart people you have in a room who are focused on a goal. It was great to rub minds with them, learn from them, work with our mentors. And I think that was a common theme throughout MS&E, where the primary conviction might lie with you, but to execute that in the world, you have to be aligned with other people and follow each other on that journey, but in a way that you each individually decide to on your own. And I think just learning that was very eye-opening and gave me better nuance to this value of autonomy that I had chosen to prioritize.
Yeah, it's like a collaborative autonomy almost.
Exactly. Yeah. And then also I studied abroad at Oxford for a quarter during my senior fall. And I think that was another pivotal moment where, as opposed to the Stanford method where you have class and section, at Oxford you have this thing called tutorials, where you're given the freedom to just go on and read about whatever you want within the topic that you're learning for that week. You get to write a paper, but then you have to meet with your tutor and communicate and explain and work together in a Socratic way to basically make sure that you understand what you read, but also to make sure that you can communicate it and to make sure that it makes sense for someone else within their context. And I think that was a really out of the box thing that I hadn't done here, especially because it was one-on-one. And that, again, just reinforced the fact that the autonomy is great. Like, you want to do your own thing, but you also want to be able to bring it home to a way that benefits people. And I think that's the way you provide value in general. And that's something I learned both here and there.
Yeah. And it just shows, again, the importance of having all of these different perspectives, all of these different experiences, particularly across different cultures and environments.
Yeah, exactly.
So the big culture and environment change that'll be going on soon for you here is moving out into the world of post-graduation. So is your work going to allow for you to continue to live these values of autonomy and agency that you've developed?
I firmly believe no matter where you're at, no matter what you're working on, even if you're in the most collectivist society, you can always live out the values of autonomy simply by just listening to that inner voice. I think that's also something I learned during my internship, a couple of different places during my time here. One was this fintech company actually out of Nigeria called Flutterwave, where I was tasked with developing some risk assessment program. And it was a very hands-off experience where I had to pretty much come up with the system, but also make sure that it fit the bill for what the company needed, and it fit well within the systems that were already in place. And that was another example of having your time to think about things from first principles on your own, but also making sure it integrates with a broader social goal. It was really impactful work, and it also taught me a lot about building a company. The founder was also one of those people who just had this idea very early on, but had to carry along I think at that point, like 2,500 people with that conviction.
And so then post-graduation, where are you going to be going and what will you be doing?
One of my core beliefs that I formed during my time here is through actually doing the Lean Launchpad program is that a deep, well-functioning capital market is one of the biggest levers for development in any country. Coming from Nigeria, that's something I've seen firsthand, how access to capital or even the lack of it can shape opportunities for growth and innovation. So that belief was really a big part of what drew me to finance. After my Flutterwave internship in the summer, I'll be heading to New York to join Deutsche Bank's capital markets team in their investment bank, just working on deals around the world. It's one of the most internationally focused banks. And my goal there is really to understand just the global playing field, to learn where I could have the most impact and eventually channel capital towards innovation and job creation in a lot of developing regions, especially across Africa.
So what inspired you to go into that area of this finance figure?
My interest in this path really started to take shape during the Lean Launchpad class, where my team was working on a project focused on prefab modular housing in Africa. And I was handling the financial side, doing customer interviews and talking with bankers and REITs and trying to figure out a good structure for funding. And just through those conversations and interviews, I had learned just how underdeveloped and illiquid a lot of the real estate markets were in some of these regions. And that lack of financial infrastructure made our project pretty much almost impossible to pull off. But it also made something clear. The need was huge. We ended up presenting on our final demo day, and actually a JP Morgan exec named Nduka came down to watch our talk, who was one of the people we spoke to throughout the process, and invited us for dinner after, and also brought along alum Shreya Mehta, who is currently up in JPM SF. And the conversation with both of them really opened my eyes to the human side of the industry and to the possibilities and to the gaps that were currently there. And Shreya and Nduka both ended up becoming mentors to me as I went through the investment banking recruiting process. So it made that feel more accessible and meaningful, and actually made that feel like a potential first step to a path where I could drive real change.
Yeah. So I'm always amazed at what a small world it is in these chance meetings. Our regular listeners will, of course, recognize Shreya's name because she was one of our guests for the graduating student profiles for the class of 2023.
Well, yes, she was.
She had this whole concept of having her personal board of advisors. And within a couple of years here, she is now making herself available to be on the board for other people, which I just love, and how quickly all of us start wanting to give back where people have helped us in the past. We now love to pay that forward. So it's such a sweet story. I love hearing that.
Yes, very full circle.
Yeah, definitely. So thinking back to then other episodes, you've actually given me the perfect segue into the final 3 questions. So first up, your advice for people coming into the program that they might not have already heard from somebody else.
For this one, I'll steal this quote from Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI. One of the things he loves to say is that inspiration is perishable. And that's actually one of the things I'm super anxious about post-grad, because Stanford is such a place with amazing energy. You just feed off the energy people bring to a room and just the excitement in the area. And I'd say, like, during your time here, you want to take full advantage of that and actually act on a lot of the things you're thinking about doing. And you can take very small steps towards doing that, working with friends on projects and just pursuing actively whatever you're dreaming about, because this is such a special place and you're only here for so long.
I love that. There's so much wisdom in there. That sounds a little bit like a life maxim as well, your signature phrase.
This is a good one. This is a good question. I'll keep it simple and just say have a why. I think a very common thing that happens that I found even with Stanford students is doing things just because everyone else is doing it or just because you think it's the conventionally right path. And that just doesn't take you far. From everyone I've spoken to who's done anything successful, they've always had a why, and it's always come from within. And again, this kind of links back to my general life principle of just like listening to yourself as much as possible.
And then finally, 2 books and another media. So the 2 books that you think everybody should read or that you would really recommend, one of them MS&E related, the other one completely free choice, and then your favorite other media.
Okay, so I'm going to skirt the rules a little here and give 2 of my general favorite books, and then my podcast will be MS&E related. So the first book, and probably my favorite book of all time that I'd recommend, is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. He covers the tension between having an idea, incubating an idea in your head, and actually bringing it out to life. and the struggle that all artists and all creators have with that. I think it's great. The other book I'd recommend is The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker being a Harvard faculty member and a prominent psychologist, I think he does a great job in helping us understand the general biases we have and the heuristics we use to make sense of the world in ways that may or may not be accurate. And I think it's just a great book to have to develop a good sense of self-awareness and be more rational about how we think about the world. For the podcast, I'd recommend the BG2 pod. Shout out Bill Gurley and Brad Gerstner. These are two incredible capital allocators. Actually, 10 minutes from campus on Sand Hill Road, who put out weekly episodes about the latest trends in technology, business, politics, and society. And I think it's really insightful. They're super smart, and I'd hope to meet them someday.
The way that luck happens around Stanford, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happened. I love your global perspective on everything that's going on. And so I have no doubt at all that you are going to continue that work, continue your autonomy and your agency and getting things done and having great ideas. You will then achieve and help others follow their dreams as well.
Yes, thanks again for having me, Lindsay. This is great.
You're very welcome.
This episode was recorded before our commencement ceremony, so I'm delighted to add a note here that Ayotunde and his team were recognized that day with second place in the awards for Senior Project. Congratulations to the Vocal Justice team. Thank you for listening to this episode of MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. This episode was produced and edited by me, Lindsay Aiken, with editing support and post-production from Jim Fabry. Our music was composed and performed by Catherine Barron, MS&E Masters Class of 2023. Please be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify or whichever platform you're listening on, and check out our website at msne.stanford.edu. That's msande.stanford.edu. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.